Welcome to Maps and Meta-Analysis.
Looking at California cities. Hi, I'm Darvish Borja.
And I'm Justin Hurst, and this is Facts and Folsom,
a meta-analysis.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Maps and Meta-Analysis. We have a very special episode for you today because we are adding our third co-host. So before we let him talk about himself a little bit, Darvish and I can introduce him. So this is Maclean Ankhelyi. He's been a friend of ours for a very long time. We've done some work together in the past, and we're very excited to bring him on. Darvish, do you have any other thoughts before we let him talk about himself?
I guess other than the fact that I feel like Maclean is very complimentary to what Justin and I do. Like, I'm very into the weeds on Folsom map stuff. Justin is very in tune with like local politics, but I feel like we're both kind of disorganized. Like we both try to pull on kind of different ends of the axis. You know, one is like dig deeper. The other one's like, you know, go broader, talk to more people, you know, sort of learn about more issues. And so I don't know. I feel like having Maclean will be a good balance, or at the very least, like a palate cleanser, like week to week of just, you know, getting the show in a rhythm, and also just having someone else to be accountable to like editing these episodes will be nice, because I have a very like irregular schedule when it comes to actually editing these. So I don't know. Yeah, I feel like when you have other people, it's just easier to be accountable as well.
All right, Maclean, if you could start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and why you're excited to be a part of the podcast, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, guys, for that intro. That was very sweet. Like Justin said, my name is Maclean. I been friends with these guys for very, very long time and been fortunate enough to work with them in the past. So I'm super excited to be here working with them now. My educational background is in business operations and technology management. Currently, I'm serving as a kind of like sales rep / account manager at a tech startup. And because of like, you know, that background and my experience in, you know, tech and business, my interest is largely in like organization, you know, business operations, making things efficiency. That's led me to become very interested in like data analysis, and like how to, you know, make better and more informed decisions using data. At, you know, so far it's been at like the company level, but I'm very interested to kind of get into the space of, you know, like local government, and, you know, kind of like regional politics and, you know, how that can be applied there as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else the listeners need to kind of know that's pertinent.
I guess maybe one question for you is like, do you have any sort of like pet issues within kind of the sphere of local politics that you know just sort of like pique your interest personally? Like for me, a lot of it is related to like housing policy and like transit and stuff like that, like just transit oriented development. And so whenever stuff like that comes up in Folsom, you know, I don't know, I get kind of excited. I just sort of want to learn more about it. So curious if you have something like that where, you know, you always want to learn more about it, or it piques your interest in some way.
And broadly, like finance and engagement too. So it doesn't even necessarily need to be like a specific subject area, but just like a general topic. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think probably my biggest passion right now, especially when it comes to like local politics and, you know, like cities, like regional focus, is like community and like walkable communities. I think that there's an extreme like underdevelopment of walkable communities in America specifically. It's in suburbia, you know, there's not really a lot of places for people to like congregate, you know, and I think that's a very missed opportunity, both at just, you know, like an enjoyment level for like citizens who live in the area, but also like for revenue and, you know, the economics. I also like passionate about transit as well. I know Dara's super passionate about that. He knows way more than me. I had the opportunity to work in like transportation manufacturing, and I think that kind of was like my gateway drug into like really loving public transit. And so I'm also pill. Yeah, it's such a pill to take. Yeah. But so I'm very passionate about that. And then I think as well as that, like I am like really interested in like budget allocation as well. I think there's a lot that's said at the dinner table about how local governments and even national governments spend their money. And I don't think it's very representative of actually how money gets allocated and spent. And I think that's, while I probably know the least amount about that third subject, it's something that I'm very, very interested in, because like, if you want to make, kind of like business operations more efficient, you have to follow the money, and you have to find ways to make things cheaper for, like the organizations that are running it. So very interested about that as well.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating because I feel like that aligns like pretty closely with our findings as well. Kind of a similar philosophy of people tend to have these like kind of ideological concerns with the budget rather than like qualms with any specific line items. Like rarely does anyone say like, oh, I disagree with like line item like 47 through 49 because I think like that money should be allocated here for like XYZ reason. It's always sort of like, I think this issue is more pressing because I find it pressing. Therefore, therefore we as a city should spend more money on it. And I mean, I'm not even gonna like sit here and like blame people necessarily. Like they are pretty sensible things. But yeah, like you said, it's always like a kind of cost benefit thing, right? Like what are you actually trying to do? Like what is the operation you're trying to get done, and then how does the budget help you in that regard? Because like the lowest budget is zero, but then you're just like doing nothing. So it's like zero operations, but zero money. So
yeah, I think that's kind of to tie that back into my like schooling. That was something that when we kind of got deeper into the major, the faculty head, Dr. Mitchell at the University of Portland, he his whole like the whole like argument behind my major was that a lot of business decisions are made on like gut feeling and not like information and facts. And I think in tech, that's being like very reversed. I think Amazon's a really good example. And it's kind of become like my passion, I guess, is like the one underarching passion is like, how do you make more informed decisions? And so I think that absolutely applies to politics and like local governance. It's the same thing, it's how do we, take away the gut check, I feel this way about something, and make, driven and like informed decisions.
Yeah. Oh, also, one thing we didn't mention, and I don't think I've mentioned this about myself in the most recent podcast, but I'm actually going to be moving to New York City. So this whole the Zoom situation will be much more permanent. Justin will be in Folsom, but Maclean, where are you based out of? And what do you think about that in relation to Folsom?
Yeah, great question. Because yes, I was raised in Folsom, but 2 years ago I moved to Seattle, Washington, and so I've been living here in Seattle, Redmond specifically, for the last couple of years, and it's been really it's eye-opening. I had the opportunity to live in Portland for school, and so I've had a chance to live in a different city that wasn't Folsom and kind of see how it was run. But it's been even more interesting living in Seattle, a city that's like very much influenced by the rise of like tech money. So there's a lot of money to be spent here, and so you get really a good glimpse into like how these local governments can use a very large and sizable budget to like improve their cities. And it's been really interesting, but yeah, love it up here in Seattle.
Interesting. Like what is the property tax situation there? Because I know that's like a big point of contention in California, and that's like a big part of just like California's budget, which eventually matriculates down to like city budgets. But is Washington like relatively high? Is it more like Texas where they sort of forego, or like I guess in Texas's case they like forego the state income tax but have a higher property tax? So like what's the situation there?
Yeah, good question. And because I'm not a property owning person yet, this isn't personal for me at the moment. But my understanding is because there's no state income tax, there's a proportionally larger property tax, I believe it is. I could be wrong. I need to fact check this, but there's no state income. So yeah, I think it's the property tax that's a bit higher because sales tax is still normal. Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating. Like I feel like that ties into your earlier point where like you would think that would make it easier for more walkable communities, like slightly higher density and things like that, because the kind of burden for a homeowner is like quite high. Or at least the way I think about it is like if your home did not like if you gain no equity in a home and your property tax is like 2%, the entire value of your equity or the entire home value gets taxed away in like 50 years, which is just like one lifetime, which is I don't know. That seems kind of. I guess it's not crazy, but it's perhaps unsustainable for those. Except like what unless you just have kind of a runway to begin with, or like you have
Yeah.
some like sizable equity in something else that's like
And
paying.
I think that would have like a pretty sizable effect in like some areas of Washington, like outside of the tech sphere. I think you see just the pure like money in that tech sphere and those like people who work in it. It kind of negates that fact a little bit. I think the bigger issue is just property values. In this city, they're very, very high, as they are like similar to like the Bay Area or New York. Very, very high property values. And so like to buy even like a 1-story home in Redmond is, you're definitely looking over $1 million.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is kind of crazy to think about that. Both Folsom, like even Folsom is like getting up there now, as far as like the median hope. Like it's not as far from the Bay Area as I originally thought.
Yeah, to that point, in the area where I'm living, for some of the models, like 3 years ago, some of them were starting at like 800, and now those same models are starting somewhere around 1.5 million.
Jeez.
So inflation has definitely gone the property values up.
Yeah. I mean, oh, sorry.
No, I know, but I mean, like to an extent, also, the renters market has also inflated quite a bit. But I'm curious, what's the renters market like for you in Seattle?
Yeah, it's an interesting market because there's no cap on like increased rent in the state of Washington, and so landlords can increase as much as they want. And I personally experienced this. The first place I was living in when I was here, they after my year-long lease, was coming up to like a renewal period, they increased my rent by 38%.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I had to move out. It was completely
Mhm.
unsustainable with my budget, even being, in a tech company that I am. It was unsustainable. So yeah, I had to find a new place to live, and it was a downsize, And I think that a lot of that could be just attributed to like the general like raise in the renters market across the country, but it definitely affected Seattle pretty substantially. I want to say this is old data that I looked at a while ago, but it was like roughly a 30% increase in the renters market in the whole Seattle area. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, definitely hit everybody hard. I mean, in Redmond specifically, the vacancy rate is only like 2.8% for like rentals. And so like rental like companies really aren't as worried about like filling their spots, and so they keep the prices are still high for like a 1-bedroom apartment in Redmond right now, 1 bed 1 bath in like a fairly nice new building. You're looking at least $2,400 or $2,500 a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. Yeah, wow, that's super fascinating because I guess I think about this issue a lot of like housing. I actually read that so one thing that's interesting about the US is that we actually kind of learned something from 2008 in that we don't really give out a ton of like adjustable rate mortgages. But in the UK and Canada, actually like a pretty sizable portion of all the mortgages are adjustable rate. And apparently there's some areas in Canada where the interest rates have risen actually so fast and the principals were high enough to where you might be making like a full mortgage payment without paying down anything towards your principal. So essentially you're like only paying interest, but there's still like some nominal amount of interest left. And that is getting like recapitalized onto your loan. So you could like technically actually have like negative equity in a home, which I didn't think was like possible, but I suppose it kind of makes sense because I guess in maybe there's a general thing, but there's a difference between adjustable rate like fixed payment versus adjustable rate like kind of moving payment. So like moving payment, as you would imagine, like your payment increases as the interest rate increases, but fixed payment, it's like your payment stays the same, just a larger portion goes towards interest as opposed to the principal. So I don't know. It feels like it just has to come crashing down at some point. And I'm sort of, I guess Justin and I have sort of like personal experience with this when it comes to Folsom of like just the really high level of obstinance when it comes to just building more housing, because housing is like one of those like very few like supply demand things that is actually like I feel like you have to have a lot of cope to like not see the supply issue to some extent. Like you can't move the house, right? It's like it's not like a supply of other kinds of goods, right? Where you can like ship them and redistribute them and like
Mhm.
resell them or something. So that it's a bit wonky there, but it's like house. It's just like fixed in the ground, and the cities have like a monopoly on what kind of housing they allow. Um, and so, but yeah, I think maybe people see too much of their personal wealth tied up in homes, which I think like adds this like conflict of interest almost to building a higher supply of housing, which is kind of naturally like a dilutive force. Like I think at worst, a city wants to like build housing exactly at the pace where they can keep the current market rates for everything around it. And that's sort of like the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is like you can keep increasing year over year, and you could sort of just like build slowly enough to where you don't put too much supply on the market like too quickly.
Mhm.
But anyway, sorry, that's just like a rant on my part.
I think it's interesting because it's a good insight into perhaps how this podcast is going to be evolving, especially since we'll still be focusing on Folsom since it's Facts and Folsom is the season we're on. But now that Maclean is in Seattle, Darvish, you're going to New York, we're going to be able to do a little bit more of a comparative look. So, maybe down the line we can do like Maclean if you're willing to like go to a Redmond or Seattle like city council meeting and we can like do a little bit of a comparison and say, hey, these issues are kind of the same, even though they're totally different communities, versus like, oh, here's how it's fundamentally different. And then same with you, Darvesh, in New York.
Yeah, I don't even know how the New York like city council meetings work because it's like
Mhm.
it's just like literally the epicenter of like trillions of dollars of wealth. Like I can't imagine
Yeah.
there's just like like just someone who is like, oh, you submitted your speaker card, like here's your like 3 minutes to like say whatever you want or something like that.
Yeah, if everyone who showed up to a New York City Council meeting got 3 minutes, I feel like that would be like a 3-day meeting.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But who knows? I mean, maybe there's something at like the neighborhood level. Because I know, like for those that don't know, New York City as a whole is comprised of like 5 boroughs. So it's like Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx. And then within those, there are like different neighborhoods. So, for example, like in Manhattan, there's like Upper West Side. Um, in Brooklyn, there's places like Bushwick. So that would be like more granular on the level of neighborhood. Um, I don't know if it actually gets more granular than that. I think the zip codes actually can get a bit more granular than that because there's like so many people. There's literally like so many people to address there that the
Mhm.
zip codes get quite kind of small. Um, so yeah, maybe there's like a equivalent of a city council meeting for a neighborhood. Um, maybe not. Yeah, I don't know in any sort of official capacity, but definitely something I'll look into.
Yeah.
Um, no, you go. Yeah, McLean. Are you
Oh,
down?
yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I'm
Uh,
very interested in like how New York does it. I was also going to add that Redmond has, I think, a very similar structured like city like government to Folsom. There's like a city hall. It's like 8 blocks that way.
Mhm.
I'm just doxing myself here, but it's yeah, it's not very far away. And I think I've interacted with a few people who, like work with the city council. And so it's a similar type of vibe, but very like different decisions in some respects that they're thinking about. So yeah, all happy to go.
Cool.
Interesting. Yeah.
That seems like a good transition into talking about how the podcast is going to look for our listeners going forward. So obviously, since I'm still in Folsom, I'll still be going to the city council meetings. They are recorded, so it's possible that McLean and Darvish will be able to watch them or at least skim them from week to week. But we'll still be covering that like we have been. And then there will be those comparative looks that we might take with Seattle and Redmond, and then New York City with Darvish. But beyond that, I think we're all gonna kind of cater to what our own interests are and what our focus are. So just for my part, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on the local politics of Folsom, some of the networking here, local businesses, that sort of thing. Continuing to go to city council, setting up interviews, all of that. Darvesh, would you like to talk about what you hope to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I really hope to focus on Folsom Maps, just adding features to it. Also, I guess just like developing my skill set. Um, yeah, I don't know. Web dev is hard, and I sort of like learn new things every day. Hopefully, I guess one of my goals too with it is to develop a bunch of like open source tools that other
Mhm.
cities could use. Because for example, one thing I noticed with Folsom is that they have a lot of like images and things like that in PDFs, and so now with like better kind of machine learning tools and things like that, I think it's quite possible to make some tools that perhaps go from images into kind of like map files and things like that. So if we could do it for Folsom, then nobody else has to like do it from scratch. They can sort of just like take their existing database of stuff and just kind of like translate it over. And I guess on that note too, I'm very curious to try to build like mock systems for the city, because like one thing, for example, that we noticed was I was trying to look into what are all the different building permits that were issued in Folsom over the last like 2 or 3 years, and there's really nothing like it. And then I found a similar thing in Placerville, but it was just sort of like a table inside of a PDF. And so I feel like it could be interesting from my perspective, at least, because like the cost of compute is like actually like extraordinarily cheap. So I would love to like build a proof of concept and essentially just like hand it to Folsom and be like, hey, if you want this, like, could you please just use this because this is better? And and also I think sorry, it's like a tangent of a tangent, but I really do feel like a lot of the opaqueness in city governments leads to a lot of consolidation and monopolization, right? Like essentially like the more opaque the process is, the larger like land developers or something like that will have a disproportionate advantage because they'll sort of know the people on the city council, and it's not even like an unreasonable thing for a city to favor that, because on some level a city wants like security, they want like relationships that they actually know, and for them the cost of building a complex like IT system, if you went through the whole like just consulting mess, I mean nothing against consultants, but because like there is some form of consulting that's like actually quite useful, but I don't know, in the space of software, it can very easily turn into a grift. And city governments are just trying to do right by their citizens, but they obviously don't have like huge like multi-tens of millions of dollars budget to create these like infrastructure systems. So I feel like if we could do that, it would be kind of like a I don't know, like a cool rebel move, I guess. And even if like one city, even if just Folsom used it, like I would be more than happy to like build that kind of stuff for free.
I think going to what you were saying with regards to that opaqueness of the process, I think the coverage that we've been doing of the city council meetings every other week, the whole consent calendar really speaks to that, especially because usually what's on those are some of the more impactful decisions that the city is making, and they're like usually just blanket passed and giving the city manager sweeping powers to execute some predetermined agreement without really giving a lot of insight into the process behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of politicking on like what to pick from the consent calendar to like look like you're tough on XYZ, and yeah, I don't know. It definitely feels like there's a theme there that is it's useful to some extent. I mean, it's useful that people get to hear these debates, but on some level, it feels a bit like I don't know, performative rather than like substantive.
All right, Maclean, what would you like to focus on going forward for this podcast?
Yeah, I think two main things. I think one is kind of like podcast operations, kind of keeping like good structure to the podcast and like helping things flow really easily. These my two co-hosts are insanely smart people, and I'm lucky to be here talking with them, and I just hope to like find the best ways to kind of like utilize your guys' knowledge and talents, and so helping with that. But the other thing that I kind of want to dive into as well is like business and commerce and like its effects on like the city government itself, as well as like like the communities in the area. Like how do like certain businesses like create more idealistic communities, stuff like that, and what's that effect on government?
Yeah, oh yeah, that's a super interesting lens. I actually like what is the symbiosis, because like on some level we know that maybe Costco has like very little involvement, but like a local restaurant might have like actually very deep ties, and so there's like this intangible effect of like, oh, you might not be bringing in as many like dollars, but it's like more of a mainstay of the community, and so there's kind of just a value in that.
I would say, oh no, you go, Maclean.
Yeah, and I was going to add one more thing is like a very interesting case would be Redmond exactly because there's quite a couple of major corporations centered here, specifically headquartered Microsoft. And so there's a huge presence. It feels very much like a corporate town. And I think that Redmond's a good case study as a very extreme example of what happens when you have a multi-billion-dollar, multinational company headquartered in your town, and like what's that effect on the budget and even just daily life here.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. It sounds like it'd be like the equivalent of like living in like Cupertino in California. Like what is it like to be in a town of quote unquote like 100,000 people, but then just like there's like $1 trillion company that probably gets to do what it wants more or less. Anyway, go ahead, Justin.
The only thing I was going to bring up was to your point on the disparate impacts of businesses in Folsom. Like one of the things I was noticing while I was volunteering for rodeo the past weekend was how there are some fast food chains in town that seem like they have a lot of influence. So I know like Chick-fil-A was shouted out quite a bit at the rodeo, even though it's just it's a chain, but like the franchisee has a lot of influence, and it seems like is very well connected politically in the town to that point. I guess my last question for you, Maclean, is I know that you're, as much as we can call it, a longtime listener of the podcast. And we appreciate that and the feedback that you've given us behind the scenes before this point. But just while we have you, what do you feel like are the strengths of the podcast that we should continue going forward? And then perhaps some things that we could work on other than everything that we talked about?
Ooh, this one's going to be spicy. I have thought about this. I think the major strength of the podcast so far has been like the transparency and like honesty and kind of just like raw nature of the issues we're tackling and how you guys have like addressed them. Very like straightforward. Like this is what we've seen. This is the data. Here's what happened. Here's what we think about that. And I think the analysis has been extremely crisp, very like easy to digest. Nothing was like so, like complex that like I couldn't wrap my brain around it. And I think that's really the strength so far. And I think our biggest opportunity like going forward is just staying like very focused, is staying as like focused to topics as possible. So, that like a listener could potentially even just rewind a clip of the podcast and just listen to it maybe a couple times if they need to rehear it. Outside of that, I mean, I think that just seriously, like the raw like critical analysis that you guys have been doing so far is incredible.
No, thank you. Actually, that kind of reminds me. Like, we should upload like clips to TikTok or something.
Yeah,
actually,
why
actually
not?
do feel like
TikTok famous.
Well, actually, no, I do feel like TikTok is like a good funnel for these kind of things. Like where you can show, like you could essentially just upload a bunch of bite-sized things, and the algorithm will almost like do the sorting of like who that clip best appeals to. And I feel like it kind of works too because it's like a vertical format, so we can like I can like clip out each person as they're speaking, and I don't know. Yeah, it feels like a symbiotic. So I will make a point of that.
I think that's one part of the helping with the operations side of it is expanding the the platform and or the platforms that we're on, YouTube, TikTok, even. So I think that's something we'll definitely take a look at.
Awesome.
Cool.
Darvish, you have any final thoughts, questions for Maclean?
Not really, no.
Right, Maclean, do you have any final thoughts?
I'm just excited to be here. This is going to be fun. I'm really excited to like dive into these issues, or not even issues, but just topics in general. I'm super glad you guys did this.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. Like, I'm happy that the band's back together, so to speak. So, yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, I guess with that, thank you all. Look forward to talking to you next week.
Adios.
Thanks, everyone.